pain must come, may it come quickly, because I have a life to live and I need to live it in the best way possible. Paulo Coelho. By the river Piedra, I sat down and wept. It's not every day that one gets to experience for the first time a long-standing part of pop culture as an adult, having gone through an entire childhood of ignorance. This is the equivalent of a 30-year-old watching the Star Wars films for the first time, or finding out after all your years of self-absorption and first-world medicated narcissism that the world really doesn't revolve around you at all. Granted, some adults don't find this out until much later in life. Anyways, I had an experience such as this recently, when I had the chance to play and complete a Sonic the Hedgehog game from start to finish for the first time ever. As I explained in my review of the excellent Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection, I hardly touched Sega's consoles as a kid. After having gone my entire life up to this point with this huge region of popular culture beyond my grasp, it turns out I didn't quite enjoy this first Sonic game. I will certainly get as deep into that statement as possible, but what an anticlimax. Yes, I played Sonic the Hedgehog and didn't really care for it. Now, I know Sega's biggest major IP is a famed character, or at least he was. He has quite a large and respectable following of decent and fair-minded citizens, but if I stopped here at the end of the first game in his franchise, I wouldn't understand why the character and his series became beloved at all. So let this be a lesson, to myself at least, in giving franchises a chance as they evolve over time. I don't think it's enough, though, to dismiss my adverse reaction on the basis of this being Sonic's first adventure. Some Sonic apologists out there may decry, but this is only Sonic 1. You can't throw an idiom baby out with idiom bathwater. Followed by inarticulate fanbase growling noises. And do you know what? They're right. Indeed, a lot of first games in some franchises are rather poor in comparison to the heights they later achieved. But then again, that defense is flawed, since there are a great many franchises that did begin with their best foots forward, as it were. Maybe not the best games in the franchise, but incredible games nonetheless. Super Mario Bros., Pokemon Red and Blue, The Legend of Zelda, Tetris, Kingdom Hearts, Super Smash Bros., Marvel vs. Capcom, Arkham Asylum, and so on. They may not be the best games in their respective series, but they were phenomenal opening acts to truly legendary adventures. All these words being said, I fully expect the Sonic games to get better in my estimation, and you can be sure I'm playing them in order of release. It's my duty. I've already dabbled in Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and it's proving to be a much more enjoyable game that's pure to its concept, curing most of what irked me about its predecessor in just its introductory stages. But that still leaves us with Sonic 1 to account for. Let's talk two things: what this game is, and then in a separate Mage-splaining video, we'll discuss how it came to be. It's my opinion that the ugliness of the latter issue is at the root of what made Sonic so pointed, specific, limited, out of focus, and over the top. Sonic the Hedgehog is a high-speed platformer developed by Team Sonic, which stars the eponymous character on a mission to save his animal friends and keep the Chaos Emeralds from the clutches of the rotund Eggman, aka Dr. Robotnik. The mad scientist has imprisoned Sonic's furry friends in mechanized automata to swell his forces against the Hedgehog. Sonic can free them by destroying the robots with his singular, characteristic spinning attack. This spin can be executed both while running and jumping, turning an ordinary platforming leap into a weaponized maneuver, a stroke of design genius. Controlling Sonic at incredible speed is exhilarating, the kind of speed that was utterly inaccessible to me as a kid, and which my adult self had to focus on to get accustomed to. It is the most impressive thing about Sonic the Hedgehog, instantly. Indeed, it was at the heart of the game's concept and purpose. It was touted as the fastest platformer there was. The paths and platforms of the various stages curve and loop to accentuate Sonic's speed, making for some breathtaking visuals. No one had seen anything like it at the time, and all these years later, it's still instantly iconic, memorable, and wonderful. though I've always held that the Super Nintendo was the superior console to the Genesis, especially in terms of versatility. The flat fact is there was no main platforming title on the SNES that came close to this kind of frantic pace. Putting Sonic the Hedgehog alongside Super Mario World, which Sega actually did with comparison footage, it was obvious which game was for the hard-edged gamer looking for something new. Whereas I can defend Super Mario World as having better and more involved level design and gameplay, such things fall short of the immediate awe of Sonic's speed. Mario's looked like tame little kiddie games by contrast, something which Sega clearly wanted. But once these comparisons were made, Sonic itself can't shake them. Sonic collects rings which serve a function similar to the Super Mario mushrooms and coins combined into one. When Sonic is hit by a trap or enemy, he'll drop all of the rings he has collected. He can try to pick them up again, but they'll quickly disappear, forcing him to collect more. If he's hit with 0 rings in his inventory, he'll lose a life. The rings therefore provide a damage buffer against most dangers like Mario's mushrooms, excluding crushing walls or bottomless pits. Collecting 100 rings earns Sonic an extra life, like Mario's coins. Other collectibles besides the rings include containers with extra lives, and temporary shields and invincibility. The game is laid out in the structure of zones, the equivalent of worlds: Green Hill, Marble, Spring Yard, Labyrinth, Starlight, Scrap Brain, and the final zone. There is no backtracking, so the progression is traditional. Each zone has 3 acts, 3 stages, which end with a boss fight against Dr. Robotnik riding in some kind of sluggish vehicle or contraption. After beating Robotnik, Sonic has the opportunity to free the rest of his forest friends before moving on to the next zone. If Sonic finishes the acts in a zone with over 50 rings, then a huge ring appears at the end of the act. If he touches it, he'll be transported to a special stage. These are whirling, swirling, psychedelic acid nightmares, mazes which are in constant rotation. Sonic tucks himself into a spin in these pinball-like stages, and the objective is to navigate past bumpers and crystalline walls, avoiding the nearby exits until you can reach the Chaos Emerald tucked away somewhere in the spiraling ether. There are 6 Chaos Emeralds to collect, and there's a unique ending if Sonic can get all of them before beating the final boss. If you don't get all the gemstones, then Dr. Robotnik taunts you like a big fat jerk. But it's level design where I have a bone to pick with this game. If the whole game was Green Hill zoned, maybe it would have been stellar. Only the Green Hill zone really preserves the concept of the game, that being high-speed platforming. I mean, you're playing Sonic the Hedgehog because it is Sonic the Hedgehog, it's high speed. Only Green Hill emphasizes Sonic speed because of its level design. There are straight paths, simple jumps, and enjoyable loop-de-loops. Then there's the next area, the Marble Zone. Sonic is immediately confronted with a set of stages that would be more appropriate for a character whose main draw was jumping, not running. There are pillars and columns that slowly raise up and down, blocks to push so you can slowly float over lava, horizontal chasms where you must slowly jump onto ledges while watching for traps, an undulating surface where the ground slowly rises and falls. See any repeating pattern there? Slow and Sonic shouldn't go hand in hand, because it's why we're playing this Sonic game at all. Why push speed, 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 Sonic is faster, faster, faster in marketing if that's not actually true? Things get somewhat better in Spring Yard Zone, which has more curves and loops for Sonic to go crazy on, as well as springs and bumpers to keep up momentum, but the zone is still plagued by elevator platforms that slowly shift, which will crush you if you try to rush through them. In Labyrinth Zone, the gameplay slows down to a painful crawl. Now I understand why people hate water levels. You would hate water levels if this was your first introduction to them. Nothing is worse than the promise of speed but then having to trudge your way through flooded dungeons in the Labyrinth Zone with a character who cannot swim. Starlight Zone doesn't take us full circle back to Green Hill, as there are some annoying fans, narrow hallways, bomb enemies, and seesaw platforms to bog things down, until you reach Scrap Brain Zone, and the game throws the last vestige of running at high speeds out the window, as you've got to face tiny conveyor belts, trapdoors, and hazards that are placed only to get in the way of Sonic's speed. Boring. This is a shame because there are a lot of good elements to the level design, such as their size, the multiple tiers and heights, the secret rooms, and of course the loop-de-loops. However, the way that Sega decided to put things directly in Sonic's path to prevent him from maintaining high speeds feels like an insult. an insult to the concept. All I wanted to do was run, but in this game, that's a good way to get the hedgehog killed. Because of the placement of the game's dangers, I feel that the accessibility of Sonic the Hedgehog is actually quite low despite its simple control scheme. This game demands that you be intimately familiar with its stages, so there's a lot of tedious trial and error coming in between you and enjoying the game in real time. A lot of the challenge in Sonic the Hedgehog seemed cheap to me, therefore. Is the game hard? Not really. The boss fights are particularly infantile, most of them, where all you have to do is find a safe spot and land there while jumping now and then. Also, having a single ring in your pocket ensures that Sonic can survive being hit at least once without having to collect more rings. It's not much harder than a Super Mario game, but whereas those relied on timing and physics, with Super Mario Bros. 3 being the perfect example, Sonic the Hedgehog rests heavily upon the player's familiarity with his stages. This is because you simply can't see what's in front of you while traveling at top speed, and even when not traveling at top speed, the screens are not large enough to see what's ahead. Even once the running levels are behind you and you reach the last 85% of the game, the designers thought it appropriate to put as many hidden dangers as possible just outside of the screen. That makes you play the game much more cautiously than perhaps you'd want to. My favorite catchphrase after playing Sonic was not, "You can't catch what you can't see," it was, "Spikes, you're dead." If the spikes shooting out of the floor at all angles don't murder you, don't worry. There are still guttering walls of fire, trap floors, swinging morning stars crushing platforms, electrocuting electrodes, and hordes of slow-moving enemies, all of which it's very difficult to see coming if you don't already remember that they're there from a previous playthrough. This isn't only due to speed, but it's also due to the game's very jittery camera. Looking up or down is disorienting. The way in which the levels mask the traps until you're right on top of them is just an exercise in cheap shots, since you can't see them coming. In Scrap Brain, you run across 2 trap floors only to hit a gout of flame. In Labyrinth, you travel down a horizontal corridor and get slammed by a huge spiked ball on a chain because the crystals and vines and the angle of the floor prevent you from seeing the trap until you're right on top of it. This kind of thing happened to me constantly. Sure, the challenge would have been significantly decreased had I had nostalgia to fall back on, but the game is unnecessarily easy to lose lives in if it's your first playthrough. It got to the point where I wasn't running anywhere at all, so I had time to react to what was just up ahead, and that's self-defeating for a game that's supposed to be about speed. And all of this should be said with this in mind that Sonic himself is only fast when his momentum has built up. He's horrifically slow when trying to get out of the way of something while standing still. It feels like you're wading through molasses. The big replay value comes from trying to get all of the Chaos Emeralds. I suppose beyond that, the zones themselves have many interesting routes to explore and several unusual and hidden areas within them. Sonic 1 is different than most of the previous Mario entries in that you can run backward and explore the stages in any direction you like. I will say that this gives the game a healthy amount of replay value, especially for its genre, though it's not enough to make me personally jump back into the game, at least not right away. Sonic the Hedgehog's visuals have been consistently applauded for good reason. They are extremely bright and eye-grabbing. The backgrounds are varied and detailed, with little drabness about them. The game runs at such a speed that you'd expect it to be far less smooth than it is. While the pace is something that you have to acclimate to, sometimes ironically slowly, it is no less impressive to watch Sonic roll into a ball without stopping and plow past hillsides and enemies. The way that Sonic could hug the curves of the levels wasn't just romantic, it was unlike anything the gaming industry had seen before in platforming. In this sense, the gameplay itself accentuated the unique visuals. As incredible as Sonic's graphics are, the one thing detracting from their appeal, to my mind, is the disorienting effect they can have, which they did have on me. And when I talk about disorienting, I don't mean they made me have seizures. I mean I sometimes had to squint or blink or look away because things were happening too fast, too brightly. The special Chaos Emerald stages are the perfect example. The first time I hit one, it felt like I'd been struck across the face. It's pretty, but there's too much going on until the brain can catch up and try to make as much sense of it before your eyes turn into jello. All things being equal, Sonic 1 was a pleasure to look at even after all these years. It's still one of the best looking games from the earlier part of the 16-bit era, and was the top of its class on the Sega Genesis. No dark outlines around the characters makes everything blend together a bit more, so there's less distinction, but with the game's speed, details are secondary. Let's talk about music, because my favorite thing about this game is its soundtrack. Nearly every song is exhaustively catchy. The music differentiated itself from the filler sounds that Sega was putting out with their myriad arcade ports, but it also sounded far less happy-go-lucky when compared with the typical and strangely Caribbean sound of a Mario game. It is electric, industrial, modern, and sleek. Masato Nakamura, who composed this soundtrack, was a member of the J-pop band, and I really think that musically influenced the percussive, upbeat sound of Sonic the Hedgehog. Despite the limitations of the Sega Genesis hardware and its occasional extreme tinniness and scratchiness, this is a great soundtrack. No wonder its tunes have become so iconic. Sonic the Hedgehog took many different sources of inspiration and slammed them all into one cobalt blue amalgamation. The result was a platformer that was quite unique for its time, though the symptom of all its borrowing took the form of a game which was marketed on a concept, speed, but which operated on quite another, slow platforming. Trying to be so many things muddled what made Sonic special. This was my biggest complaint for the gameplay. They may have jettisoned a degree of refinement in Sonic 1, but they did get the distinct mascot that Sega wanted. Now that I've finished my review, I went ahead and read up on some others, both contemporary and modern reviews for Sonic 1. A lot of glowing praise went to the pace of the game, but then I wonder if they played very far into its zones at all. A lot of reviews emphasize Green Hill Zone, because Green Hill Zone is great, but very few of them talked about Labyrinth and Marble and so on. Sega did everything to try to make Sonic the Hedgehog better than his competitor. Sonic the Hedgehog may not be the best game in the polarizing, up-and-down, rollercoastery franchise it spawned, and there are better gems to come, but there would be flops as well. It all started here, for better or worse, with a great idea, poor execution, impressive technology, cheap and small-minded envy, and a slick character design Virgin sacrificed to Sega's lust for power.